Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's story. In this episode, we dive into the darkest turning point in James and Diep's relationship. For months, they thought the only challenges they faced were distance, work, and the pressure of building a future together. But behind the scenes, James's father has been quietly pulling strings, hiring dangerous people, and manipulating those around Diep to force them apart. Diep discovers that Nai's grandmother has been threatened and paid to scare her away. And even worse, far more dangerous men are now watching her every step. Stay until the end, because this episode reveals just how far a father's control can go. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. The flickering yellow neon in the back alley workshop paints the room in sickly, uneven light. Dust floats through the air like drifting ash. Beneath it, James's father sits rigidly in a black suit sharp enough to slice through the darkness. He drums his fingers on the old teak table, each tap echoing like a quiet threat. Across from him sits a man whose past is written all over his scarred knuckles and cigarette-stained fingertips. A former enforcer, someone who's spent more nights in police interrogation rooms than in his own home. But today, even he looks uneasy. James's father speaks first, voice flat, cold, and without hesitation. My son wants to marry a poor, uneducated girl. He says it as though speaking about a blemish, not a human, not someone his son actually loves. The ex-con's jaw tightens. He stubs out his cigarette so hard the ashtray cracks. "Mr. Son," he mutters, shaking his head, "I can't help you with this. James has been my friend since we were kids. I owe him too much." But Mr. Sun slides a thick folder across the table. Blueprints, ownership papers, contracts. "This entire workshop," he says quietly, "and the Van Xuan branch as well. All yours." The man's breath catches. The workshop, his late father's dream. The branch, worth a fortune. He flips through the papers, hands trembling, shame burning in his eyes. "Just get James out of the country tonight," Mr. Sun continues. "And as for Diep, do whatever you have to. Scare her, threaten her, but do not touch my son. Hurt her if you must, but not him." The man swallows, eyes darting toward the door, as if expecting judgment to walk in at any moment. His moral compass fights desperately to remain upright, but greed, fear, and survival tug harder. At last, his shoulders sag. All right. The saw in the next room goes silent, leaving only the heavy breaths of two men sealing a wicked pact. Outside, night presses against the workshop walls like something alive. The man whispers under his breath, barely audible. This old man is truly cruel. Morning arrives in brutal contrast, golden, warm, blissfully unaware of the darkness quietly spreading across the village. Diep walks along the potato hills with a woven bamboo basket on her hip. Little Nee clings to her back, arms wrapped around her neck, giggling whenever Diep sways her intentionally side to side. "Auntie, the potatoes today are huge." Diep laughs, her voice soft and bright. "Yes, if we sell them all, we might even afford that new dress you like." Nai squeals happily. The basket swings with each step, filled with fresh potatoes dusted with red earth. Everything feels peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then, like a whisper of something wrong, a cold gust slices through the warm air. Diep stiffens. It's not the chill that scares her. It's the strange, instinctive pressure on her chest, as though her heart is warning her of something she cannot see. She adjusts Nye more tightly on her back and wipes a bead of sweat that suddenly feels too cold. Unseen by them, Nye's grandmother stands half hidden behind a cluster of banana leaves. Her breath is ragged, her eyes bloodshot. Her hands shake uncontrollably. She watches Diep in the child with a look carved from fear and guilt. Too afraid to step forward, too afraid to obey the orders she was paid to carry out. The sun stays golden, the air stays warm, but a shadow stretches across the hillside, creeping quiet as poison. Later that afternoon, dust whips along the narrow village lane. Diep and Nye walk home together, the basket now half full, Nye humming a tuneless melody. Suddenly, a figure bursts out from a hidden alleyway. It's Nye's grandmother. She slams into Diep, nearly knocking her off balance, then spins away in a panic and tries to flee. Diep steadies herself, grabbing Nye tightly before breaking into a run. "Ma'am, wait! Please, wait!" Her voice cracks with concern. The old woman halts abruptly. When she turns, her face is as pale as rice paper. Her lips tremble so violently she can barely form words. "Be careful," she warns, voice shaking like leaves in a storm. "Be careful of James's father. He is utterly ruthless." Diep freezes. The grandmother's warning isn't vague. It isn't symbolic. It's personal, direct, terrifying. Wind rushes through the mango trees overhead, scattering light and shadow across the old woman's face, splitting it into something half human, half haunted. For a few seconds, the world seems to hold its breath. A rooster crows from somewhere far off, sharp and sudden like a scream. The grandmother drops to her knees, grabbing Diep's arms with desperate strength. "You don't understand," she cries. "Your entire fate, everything that's happening, it was designed by him. James's father. He's known about you since you were just a tiny girl. He watched you grow up, always planning, always interfering." Diep's heart pounds violently against her ribs. Nye cowers behind her, frightened by her grandmother's outburst. Her tiny fingers clutch Diep's shirt tightly, trembling. The old woman continues, voice cracking. "He forbids you from marrying James. He will ruin you, girl. He will ruin your family. In this region, he covers the whole sky with one hand. No one dares defy him." Her nails dig into Diep's skin as though trying to anchor her to this moment. The world tilts. The sky blurs. The ground feels as though it's shifting beneath Diep's feet. Every memory of James's father, his cold stare, his dismissive tone, his sudden disappearances, collides into one horrifying puzzle piece that suddenly fits. A truth she never wanted, a truth too big to swallow. Her voice escapes in a faint, cracking whisper. "Why? Why would he do this to us?" But the old woman cannot answer. She only sobs, shaking harder, her guilt unspooling in the dust. And somewhere beyond the rice fields, far from sight, someone else is watching. The trap has already begun to close. Diep stands frozen in the middle of the dusty village road. Behind her, Nye's small hands cling tightly to her shirt. In front of her, the old grandmother trembles like a leaf in a storm, her knees sinking deeper into the dirt as though she no longer has the strength to stand. The sun is still shining, but something cold seems to have wrapped itself around the world. Diep tries to steady her voice. "Ma'am, what do you mean he has known me since I was little? How? Why?" Ni's grandmother wipes her eyes, her fingers dragging streaks of dust across her cheeks. "I didn't want to tell you," she whispers. "I swore I would never say a word, but I can't continue this anymore. I can't let that man use me against you." The wind rattles the bamboo fence beside them. Diep feels the weight of something enormous pressing down on her chest. "What did he make you do?" Those words push the old woman over the edge. She buries her face in her palms and sobs, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. "He hired me," she finally stammers out. "He hired me to scare you, to threaten you, to force you away from James. He said that if I didn't help, he would ruin my entire family. He would take my granddaughter away from me. I was terrified. I did terrible things. I followed you. I watched you. I waited for a chance to frighten you into leaving him." Ni gasps softly, confused, frightened. "Grandma." The grandmother can't even look at the child. She shakes her head slowly. "I'm so sorry," she whispers. "I agreed at first because I was afraid. But when I saw how much you love James and how much James loves you, I realized I could never go through with it. I could never hurt you." Diep's voice cracks. "Then why tell me now?" The old woman's hands fall to her lap. "Because he's not finished," she says shakily. "James's father, he's escalating. He's desperate. And he has more dangerous people working for him now. You are in real danger." The words hit Diep like stones. The air suddenly feels too thin. Ni presses her face into Diep's back, sensing the fear radiating from both women. The grandmother grips Diep's wrist desperately. "You need to run. You need to leave James, for your own safety. That man will crush you without hesitation. He will crush anyone who stands in the way of his plans." That night, Diep returns home with numb legs and shaking hands. She sends Ni inside first, telling her to wash up. Once the little girl disappears behind the bamboo curtain, Diep collapses onto a small wooden stool outside the house, staring at the ground. Her heart feels like it's splitting apart. James, his smile, his warmth, his quiet acts of love, his promise that they would build a future together. And now this, his father trying to erase her from that future by any means necessary. She presses both palms to her face, trying to breathe. But the more she tries to steady herself, the more broken she feels. She wants to scream. She wants to run to James. She wants to throw herself into his arms and let him protect her. But she knows something James doesn't. He doesn't know his father is hiring criminals. He doesn't know his father is targeting her. And if she tells him, James will confront his father, which is exactly what Mr. Sun wants to avoid. Which means he will retaliate. He will double down. He will destroy everything. Diep forces herself upright. She can't be reckless. She can't fall apart. Not when the danger is this serious. She looks toward the door, where little Ni is humming softly while washing her hands in a small basin. That sound, the innocence, the calm, somehow gives Diep strength. She wipes her tears, takes a deep breath, and whispers to herself, "I need to protect the people I love, even if it hurts." Meanwhile, in the wealthy district near the city's edge, James's father sits in his office, clean, cold, luxurious. A massive window stretches behind him, overlooking the distant fields where Diep picked potatoes just hours ago. But he doesn't see beauty. He sees obstacles, weakness, threats. A knock echoes. "Come in," he says. The ex-con from the workshop steps inside, wearing a cheap jacket and a guilty expression. "Mr. Sun," the man says quietly, "I followed the girl today. She met with her aunt. They talked, and I think the old woman cracked. She told her something." Mr. Sun doesn't look surprised. He rises slowly, walks to a bar cabinet, and pours himself a glass of whiskey. "So Diep knows," he murmurs. The man nods. "Then we proceed," Mr. Sun says simply. The man swallows. "Proceed? How?" Mr. Sun turns to him, eyes gleaming with cold calculation. "I want Diep gone, not killed. James would never forgive that, but gone. Out of his life, out of the country if necessary." He steps closer. She's stubborn. She loves him. People like her cling to hope like barnacles. He raises his glass. "So we will burn every hope she has left." The man hesitates. "And what about James?" Mr. Sun's gaze sharpens. "As long as he doesn't find out, nothing will happen to him." The words are calm, but the threat beneath them is unmistakable. Back in the village, Diep tries to sleep, but fails miserably. Every sound outside makes her flinch. The rustle of leaves, the bark of a distant dog, the creak of bamboo. She keeps imagining shadows moving in the dark, watching her. Just past midnight, she hears soft footsteps outside her window. Her heart slams against her ribs. She grabs the small flashlight beside her bed, creeping silently to the curtain. Through the thin woven bamboo, she sees someone standing near the chicken coop. Still, silent, completely unmoving. Diep covers her mouth to stop herself from gasping. Is it one of Mr. Sun's hired men? Are they already watching her house? Watching nigh? The figure shifts slightly. Diep retreats, trembling violently, and locks the back door. She doesn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, she makes a decision. She needs to tell someone. Not James, but someone trustworthy. Someone strong. Someone who can help her stay safe without causing a war. She thinks of only one person, Nye's grandmother. When she arrives at the old woman's house, the grandmother is already sitting outside, eyes red and swollen, as though she hasn't slept either. When she sees Diep, guilt twists her expression. "Child, I'm so sorry." Diep kneels beside her. "I need you to tell me everything. Everything Mr. Sun told you. Every threat, every instruction, every detail." The old woman hesitates. He said that Diep must disappear from James's life, that I was to frighten you, to push you to leave him. But when I refused, he hired others, worse people, dangerous people. Diep clenches her fists. Did he say why? Why does he hate me this much? The grandmother nods slowly. He said that you are not worthy of his son, that your marriage would humiliate his family, that your mother was nothing, your grandmother was nothing, and you. She stops, unable to continue. But Diep already knows. The message is clear. Mr. Sun's hatred is rooted deep, old, irrational, and cruel. The grandmother continues. He also said, if you don't leave willingly, they will create a scandal. something so big that James will never look at you again. Diep's blood turns to ice. What kind of scandal? She whispers. The grandmother shakes her head helplessly. I don't know. But I heard him mention photos, lies, police, something about accusing you of theft or fraud or... I don't know, child, but I know he can do it. He has that kind of power. Diep feels as though the world is collapsing around her. Her body goes numb, her vision blurs, and she barely hears the grandmother calling her name. She forces herself to breathe. If she stays, she ruins James. If she leaves, she breaks both their hearts.